Brian O'Neill more than likely out for the season. And other O-line news here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. You can find this show on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app on those smart TVs. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise, then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON in all caps in the game. This is gonna be a show about the O-line because suddenly the Vikings are in dire straits. They have been remarkably healthy this season. They've lost a starter here and there, but it's only been for like a month at a time. In some cases, Cam Dantzler gets hurt and it opens the door for Duke Shelley to take over, and you might even be happy about that, right? So this is we owed this back to the cosmos. You might even call it regression. the Brian O'Neill injury that he suffered in Lambeau Field happened when he went on the Darnell Savage pick 6, and I think it was the first quarter. Brian O'Neill was trying to chase it down. He was hustling. He was running as fast as he could, and he then pulled up lame and fell to the ground. That was listed as a calf injury. I have a lot of fear of Achilles just because of the way it went down. I'm no doctor, but it's certainly in my mind. And he's on IR now. And that does mean, timing-wise, that Brian O'Neill could theoretically come back if the Vikings played in the actual Super Bowl. He would be able to come back and play in that game. Because of the nature of that injury, because of how it looked to me, and because of the way that Kevin O'Connell has talked about it, he said it's significant injury, and he's been kind of cagey. I do not have hope that this is one of those things where Brian O'Neill could come back right exactly on the edge of IR. I think he's done for the season, and that means that it's Oli Udoh time. So we're going to talk a little bit about Oli Udoh today. And I have a Patreon video up on him as well. If you go to patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL, you can see 20 minutes of me actually breaking down tape on this guy. But there's other O-line news to talk about as well, and I want to make sure that we get to that. The Vikings also placed Austin Schlottmann on IR. His injury also looked pretty bad. Definitely a season-ending injury for him too. And the Vikings brought a couple of new people into the building as well. They brought in center Greg Mancz, who was most recently seen on the field for the Houston Texans, spent most of his career with the Houston Texans, started an entire season for them in 2016 when their starting center went down. He's a center, and he got waived in 2020, and he's been sort of bouncing around their practice squads since. So to me, that seems like he's a Schlottmann replacement and not an actual intended starter. But I don't know if they would start Chris Reed or not. We're actually going to get into that too. I want to talk a little bit about Chris Reed and some of the other stuff that I saw on film. But because of the injury news, and I was going to go into a whole thing about Justin Jefferson versus Jair Alexander, that mirrors an article that I wrote. But I'll just have to point you to the article because we won't have time to get into it. But Greg Mancz comes in. And Bobby Evans, who is somebody Kevin O'Connell is familiar with from Los Angeles. He was on the Rams team last year, won the Super Bowl with them, of course. And he was waived in December. So he was on the Rams this year, too. When he was waived, the fan consensus, at least that I could see, was rejoicing. So I guess Rams fans were happy to see the back of him. It can only be so meaningful, right? And I don't know a lot about Bobby Evans, but he has been signed to the practice squad. So I highly doubt that he is here with the intention of starting, and it's going to be Oli Udoh. So that leaves us in a difficult position with two new guys, also Ed Ingram. After I thought putting together a decent string of games, got his rear end handed to him by Kenny Clark. That stinks. Now that whole right side is really scary. There are some things you can do for that. That was a mailbag question. Uh, you can slide protections around. You can obviously use chippers and extra blockers if it gets worse than that. And if it gets even worse than that, then we can start talking about desperation moves of benching people and moving guys over. I got a lot of questions in the wake of Brian O'Neill's IR news of like, well, why can we move Oli Udoh to center and then maybe try Ezra Cleveland over at tackle? And what about all this stuff? And I'm going to stop you right there. I think the current configuration is the best option. I do. And that's not because I didn't think of Ezra Cleveland moving over to right tackle. He hasn't played tackle in 3 years. I don't feel comfortable on that. Oli Udoh to center is one that I've heard from a couple people. That's not a good idea at all. He is like 6'8", and you don't want a tall center. Height in a center is bad because you want a low center of gravity. And Oli Udoh plays tall anyways. So that is not a good match. The easiest thing, I mean, I don't want to teach a guy a whole new position in a week. Chris Reed can learn the snap counts in a week. That can be fixed if it's emphasized this week, but you can't galaxy brain your way through this, you know? So I think Chris Reed at center, or if you like Greg Mancz better, I don't know a lot about him. Maybe he's better than Chris Reed. I'd be open to that. So I'm curious to see what we see against the Bears here. And Oli Udoh at right tackle seems to be the best option in the building right now. I'm not particularly optimistic about Bobby Evans, but again, all I really know is that a lot of fans were happy when he got cut, which is never a great sign. But I also can't exactly have a very sure take on him. And I just kind of found out about these two guys today. So if it comes to it, we'll come up with more salient takes, but I would like to watch them play in purple a little bit first. And I think it's okay to set it aside. You don't have to have an immediate definitive take that you will stand by forever for everything. You can wait. It's okay. But what I do have, I think, salient takes for is Chris Reed and Oli Udoh. And I'm going to spend the rest of the show talking about those guys. If I had to guess right now, that's your O-line going into the postseason. And so we should probably get a sense for who these dudes are. Before I get into that, let me talk to you about my new favorite app. Can't put this thing down. It's my phone game of choice. It's Ultimate Football GM. It totally scratches that like franchise management glitch. If you're the kind of person that just lives for like off-season cap management, you got to hire the right coaches, you got to draft the right people, make trades, figure out the cap. If you just live for that stuff, and I know you all do, because I know how many of you listen to this show during May or whatever, you got to go to Ultimate Football GM. It is awesome. Locked On Vikings listeners can get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On in the game store. That is Locked On in all caps in the game store at ultimate-gm.com, or you can just look that up on app stores. That is ultimate-gm.com. Start your dynasty today. Thanks again for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. I'm going to talk about Oli Udoh once again, patreon.com/LukeBraun NFL if you want some actual tape breakdown of this, but I'll be as descriptive as possible for this here audio medium. The book on Oli Udoh is very familiar, but, and this is kind of the point I made about the Patreon thing about, is forget everything you know about Oli Udoh, because most of that is in a context that may not be particularly applicable. And what I'm getting at is if he was bad at right guard, that doesn't mean he was bad at tackle. You have to, it could be, right? Some guys are just bad at playing football, but it is not necessarily. And I think to navigate that situation and figure out who is just not translating and who is just bad, you got to look at why, right? What are they struggling with? And is that the kind of thing that translates from one position to another? If this guy's just not strong, yeah, it's going to kill you anywhere. But with Oli Udoh, I always thought, and you can, I think, go back and listen to my anytime I talked about him in the 2021 season when he was playing right guard, and I think he was like one of the worst right guards in the league according to like if you went by like PFF grades or something like that. And it was pretty hard to argue with that. Every time I talked about that, I always kind of came back to, man, he just looks like a tackle playing guard. He just looks like a dude playing a job that he's not built for. And Oli Udoh is like built to play tackle. He's huge. He is 6'5", 323. He ran a 5-second 40, which is obscene for a tackle. He has a 96th percentile wingspan, and he's fairly athletic. He is absolutely supposed to be a tackle, and moving him to guard was just something that the 2021 Vikings did on a whim, and he had a good camp there, and they were like, hey, maybe he's got something, kind of like what happened with Mike Harris many years ago, and Mike Zimmer was a head coach there too, so they probably had some memory of it. Mike Harris was also like way too tall to usually play guard, but he like did pretty well, and then he of course had his like blood clots thing, his career ended. So maybe they were just kind of, it felt like it was a whim. Like if Oli Udoh didn't have a good day that specific day, they would have been like, all right, we tried it for a day, but it actually worked out and he won the job. And then of course, actual season comes around, he struggles a bunch. That all doesn't need to be relitigated, but point being, that was not a plan. They did not plan to say, okay, and Oli Udoh will become a guard and we will, put forth a program for him to learn how to play guard and execute it. It was sort of, they were winging it. All that is to say, he just shouldn't be a guard. And what those measurables mean at guard, when you're big and tall and long and fast like that, it means it's like trying, what is the metaphor I'm looking for? It's like trying to pack a bunch of bendy straws into a cigarette box. It's just too long and gangly, and there's too much stuff that has to bend and go out of shape the way it's not really like designed to, and it's just going to be an inefficient experience. And with Udoh, that was part of it. Udoh just plays tall. He's just not very good at getting his shoulders out kind of over his knees. He doesn't bend at the waist as much as you would want. If you like compare him to Christian Darrisaw in their initial sets, you can see it. And he plays, at least against Green Bay, he was playing the hug technique, which is something that actually Green Bay popularized very long ago. I mean, they really were at the forefront of it in the league for a long time. And that's where you swing your arms around, you completely seed your chest. Everybody can get into your chest, and you're supposed to be big and strong enough where you can anchor, and Oli Udoh is, so he can totally play this way. And then you get your hands on their shoulder pads, and as long as they don't leave your frame, you'll never get called for holding, and you can really control them that way, and the only way they have to go is through you, and if you're somebody like Oli Udoh, that is exactly what you want them to be doing. And that's the way that he plays. So all of his reps are terrifying. So it looked like he's just getting walked back and walked back. But then it's a matter of, can he anchor it? And you're just living on the edge of your seat. It is, I think, a dangerous way to live too, because there are, counters to the hug technique that more veteran guys and star edge rushers, like who the Vikings will probably play, right? Kayvon Thibodeau. I don't know how he'll do against it. He's a rookie. We don't have a lot on him. But take somebody like Nick Bosa or Micah Parsons or Josh Sweat, who the Vikings also will have to beat if they want to make a run at this thing. Those guys are going to have counters to the hug technique. And so that is part of it with Udoh, is he played only that. And I don't really remember from 2019 if he had more pitches in him, but I would love to see different sets and to see him sort of expand that skill set. But also, when you play the hug technique, again, you're seeding your chest. You're seeding like a lot of leverage. Guys are going to push you. and you're already conceding leverage. So playing really upright and tall is ceding too much leverage now. Like you're ceding extra leverage in addition to what you're kind of giving up on purpose. And so it kind of makes it that much harder to anchor. Again, Udoh is very strong. So he kind of got away with it against somebody like Kingsley Enagbare, right? That's not his game. I don't know if he continues to get away with that. And so those are a couple of the concerns I have with Oli Udoh. But he did play well in the Green Bay game. He was a good right tackle in that game. Is that going to keep going? The traits kind of make me concerned about that. But at this particular juncture, I feel better about that package than probably any package you would find lying around on the street. And that's the thing about these sorts of decisions. If you want to talk about finding somebody who isn't Oli Udoh to play right tackle, who's out there in January? Starting tackles aren't just lying around. If they could play, they'd be on a team. And so you'd have to either try to, I don't know, coax somebody out of retirement and hope they haven't lost too much weight, or you have to start being okay with some really bad blemishes. And he plays a little bit too upright, but he usually anchors, is just not going to be as bad of a blemish as, I don't know, this guy had chronic knee issues, but maybe we can coax him out of retirement, like the JC Treader thing at center from this offseason. It's like, what problems are you taking on just for the sake of having different problems, right? So with Udoh, I'll take it. Nobody's happy about it. Nobody wants it more than they want Brian O'Neill. And you're not going to lose a cornerstone player. Like, the part of having cornerstone players is that losing them is going to be a blow, because you don't exactly bring in starting quality competition for Brian O'Neill, right? That would be a waste of resources. So you're not going to have that guy in the building. But as far as third stringers go, because Blake Brandel is also out, you could do a lot worse than Oli Udoh, if you ask me. There's also this center issue. The Vikings are still talking about Garrett Bradbury's possible return. We don't have a lot of information on that, so we still just kind of have to wait and see. But for now, I am just kind of looking forward as though Bradbury doesn't exist and saying, okay, what happens? There's no way Bradbury plays against the Bears. So then you have this Chris Reed, maybe Greg Mancz thing. If Greg Mancz does play against the Bears, I'll be very curious to see how he does. But if it's Chris Reed, you got the snap count thing. And that's what I want to talk about next is, I guess, let's talk a little bit about problem solving. And I want to try to expand the way that you think about problem solving, because the way things are handled in public discourse now, and I mean not only social media, but like around true, like actual media, like journalism, newspapers and stuff. I'm disappointed in it, and I think we can do better, you and I. Speaking of doing better, I'm sure you all have some lofty goals for 2023, especially if you're a small business owner. And small businesses that are looking to grow in 2023 are probably going to have to start thinking about expanding and hiring new people. For that, look no further than LinkedIn Jobs. You can hire qualified candidates that have the right skills and the right things that you're looking for. They have all kinds of screening questions and 875 million member profiles that you can put your job posting in front of, and all sorts of helpful tools that can help you whittle and narrow that sample down to people that are actually good for your business. That giant stack of resumes can be a really intimidating process, and LinkedIn Jobs is a necessary tool to help you make that into a reasonable decision. LinkedIn Jobs can help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I often say the phrase, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, when talking about benching or firing players or coaches or whatever. It's becoming a cliche of mine, and I should probably have more variety in the way I talk, but I do think that it's apt. And that's kind of what I want to get into with the center position. Obviously, if Bradbury ends up being healthy enough to play, everybody wants that. But otherwise, I think a lot of people think of the idea of Chris Reed trotting back out there at center and would call that negligent, right? They would say, well, he just did so bad with the snap counts. How can you possibly put him back out there? And I want to contend with that. I want to really investigate that particular opinion. So if you're somebody who agrees with that thinks that the Vikings would be insane to put Chris Reed back out there in the playoffs, then this is for you. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of Chris Cooper, offensive line coach, who just watched that, had to deal with that, had to deal with players being visibly upset with Chris Reed on the field, and he got blown out and all that stuff, strip sacks, the whole lot, right? Bad day. Now you got to go deal with it. How do you deal with it, right? You're the coach. And to answer that, first we have to get on the same page about what the goal is, right? The goal is to get the best offensive line play from everybody. And I think this is a good week to remember that this is a collection of people and that they need to be handled like people. They're not mutt cards, right? And I think that needs to just be thrown out there every once in a while. Too much of football analysis, I think, treats players like they're Madden Ultimate Team cards and things to be exchanged, OVR ratings, see if you can't replace that 68 with a 70. Newsflash, they're people. And people are dynamic. People can grow and learn from mistakes. And people can perhaps take a bad day, internalize it, and turn it into improvement at what caused that bad day. I'm sure we've all been through it, right? You mess something up and you say never again and you fix it. So if I'm Chris Cooper, I want to fix it. And let's say you bring in somebody like a Greg Mancz and say, who knows what his problems are. I can't tell you those at this particular moment. But he has not made a team in 2 years. He's been on practice squads and bouncing around. So what problems prevent him from being rosterable, right? That's the question. And I don't know what they are. So let's just make one up for the sake of argument. Let's say, I don't know, he sets his pass sets really slowly and loses to quickness, which was Oli Udoh's problem. So that's in my head. So let's go with that. Would you rather try to rebuild the way somebody sets up in pass protection, or would you rather go over the 2-page snap count part of the playbook, or maybe 4 or 5-page snap count section of the NFL playbook with Chris Reed and try to figure out where all the miscommunications were? To me, the latter seems like a way easier task. And that can turn Chris Reed into, I think, a better center. When it came down to pure blocking, I thought Chris Reed did an okay job. I think there were a couple of times when he misblocked the run. I blocked the wrong guy, although I'm being very speculative there, so I can't say for sure. But, in actual, I think there was one or two plays where he just straight up got beat because he just wasn't very good at playing O-line. And again, as a third string center, you'll take that, right? It's just the snap count thing. And that becomes the next question. If you fixed the snap count problem, if Chris Reed, the ghost of Christmas future, comes to you and says, no, Chris Reed will never have a snap count issue again in the rest of his career, where do you place that player on the depth chart now, knowing that this just isn't going to be a problem anymore? How do you value that? Personally, if you can take the snap count problems out, I am more than satisfied with Chris Reed as the center for as long as it takes for Bradbury to get healthy, hoping he gets back in the playoffs. And I think it's really hard to place any faith in that because I think our brains are really wired to go, well, it happened, so we should expect it to happen again, right? And I mean, so much of football analysis is basically just that. Well, this team lost, so I expect them to lose again, right? Or increasingly more complex and intelligent ways of basically saying, well, historical data suggests, this is the whole thing I had with Peter, right? Historical data suggests that this will happen, and therefore I expect it to happen. And our brain, it makes sense, right? That's the way our brains are wired. But that's kind of why I'm trying to encourage you to think outside the box, outside of that box a little bit. Chris Reed had a lot of snap count issues. The team knows that. I would be shocked if that wasn't a huge emphasis with him throughout the week, right? That is what the coach is going to say. You got to fix that. And hey, I don't know how Chris Reed operates, right? Maybe he is the guy that you say, go fix it. And then he goes and fixes it. Or he's the guy that says, hey, let's fix it together and I'll sit down and we can talk about it. Maybe he learns that way, whatever's best for him, right? And Chris Cooper's whole job is to know that. If snap count issues persist, if there are more snap count issues, there's an issue against Chicago and Soldier Field, then we can talk about it. Then it's like, okay, he's proven incapable of fixing this problem, but you best believe a lot of effort is going toward that this week. And I want to see the results of that. And if it sucks, then all right, now we get a new guy in and for the game that actually counts. But I am trying to encourage you to have more tools than a hammer so everything doesn't look like a nail. Tomorrow's crossover Thursday, we'll be talking to Lauren Cox of Locked On Bears. I know this is not exactly the highest octane game. The stakes are very low comparatively, but hey, we'll still talk about it and we'll check in on Chicago. It's really a welfare check more than anything else. I hope Lauren is surviving whatever is going on in Chicago this season. And then we'll do our bold predictions and stuff on Friday. I'll see y'all for all of that. And as always, Skol.